I got a question in my Facebook boxing group the other day from one of the members. And the question was, who is better at building fighters, Frank Warren or Eddie Hearn? Now, it's an interesting question because it depends on what you mean by building fighters. Because there's building a fighter in terms of developing his skills and ability. That's one definition of building a fighter. But another definition would be building a fighter in terms of his profile, his market value. There are two different ways or two different definitions of building a fighter. And personally, in my opinion, I think that Frank Warren is better overall at building fighters, in terms of their skills and ability, picking the right fights at the right time, managing fighters, essentially. I think Frank Warren is better at managing fighters, building them up, picking the right fights at the right time, developing them in that way. But Eddie Hearn is better in terms of building their public profile. One of the reasons, there are several reasons, but one of the reasons that Eddie Hearn is better is because he understands the younger generation. Frank Warren, being a much older man, is a little out of touch with what the youngsters like now. So, for example, Eddie Hearn was very quick to start using Twitter as a promotional tool in his, early promotional career when he took over the reins of Matchroom Boxing. Frank Warren used to actually ridicule Eddie Hearn for going on Twitter. And then after ridiculing him for a long time for going on Twitter, now Frank Warren has a Twitter account. Even though it might not be operated by Frank Warren himself, he still has a Twitter account because they finally cottoned on to the fact that actually the social media stuff is the future in terms of promotion. So, yeah, Eddie Hearn understands how to market fighters, how to build their public profile and sell them to the public. And, he gets criticized a lot for having hype jobs, the likes of Lewis Ritson, the likes of Anthony Fowler. You had a lot of people criticizing him, saying, they're not really that good and another Matchroom hype job and all this kind of stuff. Well, the fact that you're calling them a Matchroom hype job, what does that suggest? That suggests that there's a lot of hype about those fighters. That means that Eddie Hearn, from a promotional point of view, in terms of building their profile, he's doing a good job, right? Frank Warren fighters, they might be getting built very well in terms of picking the right fights at the right time, at least some of them. But in terms of the exposure they're not getting the same level of exposure as the Eddie Hearn fighters because Frank Warren, for whatever reason, isn't doing as good a job at actually promoting. He might be doing a better job in terms of building, picking the right fights and all that kind of stuff, but promoting, making the public aware of them, he's not doing as good a job as Eddie Hearn is doing on that front. But the criticism that people could level against Eddie Hearn, and I think is a valid criticism, is that Hearn is not picking the right fights at the right time for his fighters. But Hearn doesn't actually manage a lot of his fighters, if any. Frank Warren actually manages, and always has managed a lot of his fighters. And even the fighters that he doesn't manage, by his own admission, he has a lot of input in terms of who those fighters fight. And he's very forceful. He said that in a recent IFL interview, like yesterday, that he's very forceful a lot of the time, even when he doesn't directly manage a fighter in terms of who he thinks the fighter should fight next. Very hands-on. So, yeah, I think Warren is better at certain things than Hearn, and Hearn is better at certain things than Warren. I will say that. And again, that's not to say that all Eddie Hearn fighters are badly matched and not developed the right way in terms of picking the right fights at the right time. Some of them are matched well, some of them are matched not so well. But again, it's not all down to Eddie Hearn. Maybe Eddie Hearn isn't hands-on enough with some of his fighters, or maybe Eddie Hearn just doesn't have the wisdom. Maybe he doesn't know boxing well enough. Eddie Hearn is a boxing guy, don't get it twisted. He's been around boxing his whole life. But he's not as old as Frank Warren. He's not as experienced as Frank Warren. So maybe because of that, he's going to make more mistakes with regards to matchmaking. Maybe he doesn't have the kind of wisdom and understanding of the sport necessary to matchmake as well as Frank does. And that's assuming that Frank is the one making a lot of these matches because, of course, promoters have matchmakers that come up to them with lists of opponents and find opponents and all that kind of stuff. I guess the promoter, in some instances, along with the trainer and manager, has the final say, but the matchmaker is the one who's going to bring the list of names forward and whatnot. Maybe Frank Warren has better matchmakers than Eddie Hearn has, So, yeah, that's my take on it. I think that both guys have got strengths, both guys have got weaknesses. Eddie Hearn's strengths are more with the actual promoting, and Frank Warren's strengths are more with the actual managing and building of the fighter in terms of his skills and ability and, choosing the right opponents at the right time and stuff like that. I think Frank Warren's probably better at that. And he's always been good at that, Frank. Going all the way back to the 1990s, he was good. And I think he's probably getting better and better, with experience and whatnot. So, yeah, that's my take on it. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. It's happening. I'm out.